For decades, globalization was the rule of the world. Trade flowed across borders, goods became cheaper, economies grew closer. And at the center of it all stood one country, the United States. But today, something has shifted. In a bold and unexpected move, the U.S. government recently announced sweeping import tariffs, a 10% flat rate on most goods, and up to 50% on certain nations with large trade surpluses. These measures, dubbed by President Trump as the Liberation Day tariffs during his April 2, 2025, announcement, are more than just economic policy. Trump framed this as a historic Liberation Day, signaling a shift toward economic independence, though the term has sparked debate over its implications. They signal a profound change, perhaps even the end of globalization as we knew it. It's not just about tariffs. It's about a strategic shift in America's role in the global economy, from the architect of free trade to the agent of protectionism, from a champion of open markets to a power seemingly pulling away from the very system it helped build. This isn't the first sign of retreat. The World Trade Organization's dispute resolution mechanism, once a vital pillar of international trade law, has been paralyzed since 2019, largely because the U.S. blocked appointments to its appellate body. Now, with these tariffs, Washington is bypassing multilateral rules altogether. So what's really going on? Is this a reaction to domestic frustrations, a way to address America's trade deficit and manufacturing decline? Or is it something deeper, a calculated move to reshape the global order in America's favor? Over the next few minutes, we'll dive into 5 critical ideas that might explain this dramatic turn. Has the U.S. truly abandoned its leadership role in global trade? Are tariffs the wrong answer to the right domestic questions? Could this policy alienate allies and partners? Is China the target? And is America playing the right game? Or is this a long game, a high-stakes strategy to rewrite the rules? This isn't just about economics. It's about the future of global cooperation, of trust, of who gets to write the next chapter of the world economy. Welcome to a new era, where the old rules no longer apply. For nearly 8 decades, the United States was the beating heart of the global trade system. After World War II, it led the creation of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the foundation for what would later become the World Trade Organization. It promoted open markets, multilateral cooperation, and a rules-based global order that helped lift millions out of poverty and fuel decades of economic growth. At the core of this system was a simple idea. Trade isn't just about goods. It's about stability, trust, and shared prosperity. And no country championed that idea more forcefully than the United States. But today, that legacy seems to be unraveling. Instead of defending the multilateral institutions it helped build, the U.S. is now taking actions that directly undermine them. The clearest example? The WTO appellate body, the very court meant to resolve trade disputes between nations, has been non-functional since 2019. Why? Because the U.S. government refused to approve new judges. That move alone crippled the entire dispute resolution process. Now, with sweeping unilateral tariffs, the United States is sending an even louder message. We no longer trust the system we created. This marks a significant departure from U.S. leadership in global trade, not just in policy, but in principle. Where America once acted as a stabilizer in turbulent times, it now risks becoming a source of instability itself. Allies are confused, rivals are emboldened, and the rules that once kept global commerce predictable are starting to look optional. Some argue this is just a negotiating tactic. Others see it as a deeper turn inward, a shift from global leadership to economic nationalism. Whatever the case, the world is watching. Because when the most powerful economy walks away from the table it's set, the entire room starts to shake. So why is the United States turning inward? Why these sweeping tariffs now? Officially, the answer is simple: to fix America's trade imbalance, a persistent issue that has fueled domestic frustration over lost jobs and declining industries. In the short term, these tariffs serve as a visible response to public anger, promising quick wins for American workers. Yet, behind the rhetoric, there's evidence of a broader strategy, a calculated effort to reshape global trade rules in America's favor over the long haul. The U.S. has run a trade deficit for decades, importing more than it exports, and policymakers argue this hurts American workers and industries. But here's the truth. A trade deficit is not necessarily a sign of economic weakness. In fact, it often reflects something else entirely: a strong currency, high consumer demand, and a thriving services sector. The U.S. economy is highly competitive in services, technology, finance, education, media, and intellectual property. In 2023 alone, America ran a $278 billion surplus in services trade, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. But that part of the story rarely gets told. Instead, public attention and political outrage focuses on the goods deficit: cheap imports, closed factories, and shuttered steel towns. This frustration is real. But the real culprit isn't trade itself, it's structural. America's Rust Belt, once the pride of industrial might, has been in decline for decades. Automation, offshoring, and underinvestment in worker retraining have done more damage than any trade deal ever did. And yet, instead of addressing these deeper issues, politicians are reaching for an old, blunt tool: tariffs. Yes, tariffs can raise the cost of imports. They might make domestic goods look more competitive, but they don't bring back manufacturing jobs overnight, and they certainly don't fix the underlying economic anxiety that millions of Americans feel. In fact, they can make things worse. Higher prices hurt consumers. Supply chains get disrupted. And American businesses that rely on imported components, from car makers to small retailers, end up squeezed from both ends. So why push this policy? Because it's simple. It's visible. It makes for strong headlines and easy talking points. But in the long run, it may be distracting the country from what really needs fixing: education, innovation, infrastructure, and a social contract that works for everyone, not just for Wall Street. Tariffs don't just affect goods and services. They affect trust. When the United States imposes broad, sweeping import tariffs, not just on strategic rivals, but also on longtime allies, it sends a message far beyond economics. It says, we'll act alone, even if you're on our side. During the Trump administration, we saw the beginning of this shift. In 2018, the U.S. imposed steel and aluminum tariffs on the European Union, Canada, Japan, and other partners, citing national security concerns. That alone sparked outrage. The idea that America's closest friends were now considered a security threat? It didn't sit well in Brussels or Ottawa. And now, those same concerns are back, but bigger. The new tariff plan affects a wide range of imports across the board. There's no clear distinction between ally and adversary. That's a problem, because modern supply chains are global and interdependent. When you tax imports from Germany, you're not just hurting German exporters. You're disrupting the American companies that rely on German machine tools. You're inflating costs for U.S. factories, builders, and small businesses. This unpredictability makes it harder for companies to plan. It discourages foreign investment. And most importantly, it forces America's allies to hedge their bets. We're already seeing it. The European Union, facing a 20% reciprocal tariff, is exploring deeper ties with Asian markets, while Japan, 24%, may lean further into regional pacts like CPTPP. In the global south, nations like Madagascar, hit with a 47% tariff, could pivot toward China's Belt and Road Initiative, especially if the U.S. repeals trade preferences like AGOA by September 2025. America's closest partners still want to work with Washington. But when policy shifts feel abrupt and unilateral, it raises a painful question. Can we count on the U.S. to lead? Or will it always put America first, even at our expense? In a world increasingly shaped by geo-economic blocs, trust is currency. And once it's lost, it's hard to get back. Let's be clear. China is a primary target, and the concerns about its behavior are real. With tariffs on Chinese goods reaching an effective 54% by April 9, 2025, the U.S. is signaling a hard line against Beijing's trade practices. For years, American policymakers, businesses, and workers have raised alarms about unfair trade practices, massive state subsidies, intellectual property theft, currency manipulation, market access restrictions, and perhaps most importantly, an industrial policy that aggressively supports Chinese firms while shutting out foreign competitors. These are not conspiracy theories. They're documented patterns, and they've tilted the playing field. So yes, the the US has a right to be concerned. But this isn't just about China. The policy casts a wider net, with a universal 10% tariff on all imports starting April 5th, and additional reciprocal rates of up to 50% hitting dozens of nations, allies and adversaries alike, by April 9th. Here's the deeper question. Are we responding in a way that actually works? Or are we undermining ourselves? The World Trade Organization was created, in part, to handle exactly these kinds of disputes. And back in 2001, when China joined the WTO, it made up only about 5% of global GDP. Today, it accounts for over 15%, according to the IMF. That's a massive shift, and it means China's role in the global economy is no longer marginal. It's central. This makes a strong, functioning WTO more important than ever. But what has the US done? It has weakened that very system by blocking judicial appointments and ignoring dispute rulings. It's like getting into a boxing match, then slashing the referee's whistle. Instead of organizing allies to reform trade rules and hold China accountable, the US is acting unilaterally. And ironically, that helps Beijing. Why? Because when America bypasses global institutions, it makes it easier for China to frame the US as the one breaking the rules. That narrative resonates, especially in the global South, where countries are already skeptical of Western double standards. In trying to isolate China, the US may be isolating itself. What would a smarter strategy look like? Rallying democratic allies to modernize WTO rules, coordinating joint pressure on intellectual property violations, offering competitive alternatives to China's Belt and Road Initiative, and above all, rebuilding credibility in the global rules-based order. Because if America walks away from the system it created, who will enforce the rules? And whose rules will fill the vacuum? There's another way to read this moment. A more complex, and perhaps more calculated, interpretation. What if these sweeping tariffs, these unilateral moves, these attacks on global trade norms, aren't signs of panic, but signs of strategy? Because let's be honest, the United States isn't just reacting to the past. It may be trying to reshape the future. Let's look at what's actually happening on the ground. 1. Forcing a global supply chain reset. For decades, multinational corporations optimized for cost. They built sprawling global supply chains, often centered in China, the world's factory. But that model proved fragile. COVID-19 exposed it. The U.S. China trade war accelerated it. Now, America is pushing for friendshoring and nearshoring, encouraging companies to relocate operations from China to closer, more politically aligned partners like Mexico, Vietnam, or India. And it's working. In 2023, Mexico overtook China as the United States' top trading partner. U.S. investment in Southeast Asia surged. Chipmakers are building new plants in Arizona and Ohio. So yes, tariffs raise costs, but they also change incentives. And that might be the point. 2. Reindustrializing the American economy. For years, both parties in Washington talked about bringing jobs back. Now, it's happening, with money and muscle. The CHIPS and Science Act allocates over $50 billion to support domestic semiconductor production. The Inflation Reduction Act injects hundreds of billions into clean energy manufacturing. Electric vehicle supply chains are being built, not in Shanghai, but in Kentucky and Michigan. These aren't just subsidies. They're strategic investments to rebuild America's industrial base, especially in sectors considered vital to national security. Tariffs, in this context, act as a backstop, raising the price of foreign competition, giving domestic firms room to grow. 3. Fragmenting globalization into value-aligned blocs. This isn't the end of globalization. It's the rise of a selective, values-based globalization. Instead of universal trade deals, we're seeing minilateral agreements among nations that share democratic values, security goals, or technological standards. Think of the U.S. EU Trade and Technology Council, or the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. These are not traditional free trade deals, but frameworks for cooperation on AI, green tech, cybersecurity, and data governance. The goal? Shape the rules of the 21st century economy before China does. And yes, tariffs may be part of the pressure campaign, signaling, align with us, or face higher costs. 4. Using tariffs as negotiating leverage. We've seen this playbook before. During the Trump years, Tariffs weren't just policy, they were bargaining chips. First impose pressure, then extract concessions. It worked with Mexico. It worked, to an extent, with Canada and South Korea. Now, the Biden administration seems to be adapting that approach, but with longer-term goals. For instance, climate-based tariffs are being floated to push global standards. Trade penalties are linked to labor rights, digital regulation, and data privacy. In this world, tariffs become tools of geo-economic statecraft, used not just to punish, but to shape outcomes. So is it working? Too soon to say. This strategy carries risks. It may alienate allies. It may invite retaliation. It may raise costs for U.S. consumers in the short term. And it may fail if other countries build alternative systems. But here's the big idea. Maybe America isn't retreating from globalization. Maybe it's trying to rebuild it on its own terms. Because in a fragmented world, power lies not in following the rules, but in writing them. We are living through a turning point, not just in trade, not just in economics, but in the architecture of the world itself. For nearly 80 years, the global system was built on the assumption that nations would trade, compete, and grow under shared rules. And at the center of that system stood the United States, a leader, a builder, a stabilizer. But now, America is writing new rules, or perhaps refusing to play by the old ones. What we've seen with these tariffs is not an isolated act. It's part of a broader pattern, a geo-economic recalibration with far-reaching consequences. It raises hard questions. Can a country lead a system it no longer fully believes in? Can America remain the global anchor while prioritizing short-term domestic wins? And in trying to shape a world aligned to its values, is the U.S. prepared for the backlash? The truth is, this isn't just about America. It's about all of us. Because when the largest economy in the world pivots, it creates waves, not ripples. And in those waves, smaller economies, emerging markets, and everyday people must find their footing. Globalization, as we knew it, may be fading. But something else is emerging in its place, a more fragmented, more fragile, and more contested global order. What comes next? That depends on choices made today, in Washington, in Beijing, in Brussels, in Delhi, and maybe in your own community. So we leave you with this. What do you think this moment truly means? Is America stepping back or stepping ahead? Are we witnessing the collapse of a system or the birth of a new one? And more importantly, can we, as a global community, learn to build trust again, even as the rules are being rewritten? If this video gave you a new perspective, share it, comment below, or start a conversation. Because the future isn't just something we inherit. It's something we shape.